Good morning everyone, Noah Frank here with the Drivers Market. Today we are going to be showing you the installation of the DualShift model DS-01. We are going to be doing this on a transfer case that has already been pulled from a vehicle. Now, your removal of the transfer case for your vehicle is specific to your vehicle. The removal is a little bit different from the 4Runners, Tacomas, T100s, but the process for the installation of the DS-01 is going to be the same every time, and this is a general guideline that you can use to install yours. These transfer cases are sealed units, meaning that if you pull them out, they are not going to leak automatically. They are sealed front to back, and we're going to show you which seal you need to break in order to separate these cases. You are going to want some RTV, some brake cleaner. You're going to want the ability to drain this, so you do need a drain pan, and you're going to want to have either a Dremel, a saw that can cut some steel, or a cutoff wheel on an angle grinder handy, because we are going to need that. Other than that, general tools, you're going to need a 6mm Allen key, you're going to need a 12mm socket head, and you are going to want a friend to help you separate these cases if they're stuck, maybe a pry bar if you don't have a friend. Anyways, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to get the camera zoomed in on the case. We'll go through the shifting. We'll show you the older shift knob style, and we'll show you what we're moving towards. So I'll meet you inside this case. Before we get started and move along any further, what you're looking at right now is the top of the case. You would have seen this as you are removing the transfer case from your vehicle. These are your two shift rails. These are what we're going to be working with today. This side over here is your 2-wheel by 4-wheel shift rail, and this one is your high, neutral, low shift rail. What we're doing is isolating the two shift rails instead of having them on one shifter like this J shift here. So we're going to be breaking up this shift rail and this shift rail. This gives you access to the 2 low position and the 2 neutral position, which are normally limited to when you are in 4-wheel drive. We're going to be doing that, of course, by utilizing our dual shift. Now, this one is set up in the manual configuration. If you were set up in the auto configuration, you would have these facing the other side. So we're going to be utilizing this today, and to do that, we need to take the shift rail out in order to cut this notch right here that my finger is on. This notch will have to be removed with the Dremel or cutoff wheel like we were talking about earlier, but we will also need to remove a piece in the back of the case that keeps the 2 shift rails together. This piece is not going to be reinstalled. We're going to remove it and dispose of it, and we will show you what that looks like here in just a sec. Some other things to consider when you're going about this: you do not want to have any hardware on the actual transfer case as you're doing this. So we've taken the speedo off, we've taken the trans mount off, and we've taken the counterweight off. So you'll want to have all of the accessories off of this as you're moving forward. Now that we've talked about getting all of the accessories off, there's only a couple of things that you have to do. You have to remove these bolts that go all around that keep the 2 case halves together. These do have a torque spec, so we'll talk about that when we're doing reinstallation. And the drain plug has been put back in. We did drain this case. However, there will still be oil down in the bottom of this case, so be aware of that. We're going to do this right here on this toolbox, but I'm going to put a rag underneath it in order to catch that oil when we do split these cases. Then if we spin the case around, we will want to get this nut here off that holds your front drive shaft flange on, and then we'll want to take the flange off. When we separate these cases, we're going to separate them right down this case line, and that means we're going to pull the entirety of this inner shaft. We're going to pull this shaft out through the back of the case when we split them. So in order for us to do that, we're going to remove this nut right here, and you'll want to have a new one of these handy when you're putting your case back together. These are reusable, but we tend to break them as we're removing them, so go ahead and get a new one of these from your Toyota dealer. And then, like I said, we're going to take these bolts off all the way around. And then there are a couple of dowel pins in here. There's going to be one over here on this side, and there's another dowel pin over here on this side. So when you are separating those cases, try to separate them as close to those dowel pins as you can, and you'll see that there is a spot right here where you can put a pry bar in between and slowly start to separate. So we're going to get that front flange off. I'll show you what that looks like. Then we will zip all of these bolts all the way around off, and then we will show you how we are going to separate this case again with a rag underneath it to catch as much oil as we can. This is that front flange nut that we've removed. We did not break this one, so in theory we could reuse this, although my recommendation will always be to get a new one because of the indent where you lock this down. Now that we've got that off, we can remove this flange. This one came off super easy. Sometimes you need to tap on them, and there's teeth inside of there that grab onto that shaft, and you don't want to hit this side to side because you don't want to damage those teeth. So the best thing that you can do is tap on this center shaft and then press in with your thumb, and it will separate, like I said, fairly easily. Moving around to the back, now we are going to loosen these up all the way around like we talked about and prep for some spillage for some oil coming out. These are 14 millimeters, by the way. In preparation of splitting these case halves, there are a couple more things that we're going to want to do on the top end really quick. The first is to shift this upper rail into the four-wheel drive position. Currently we are in the two-wheel drive position, which means this rail needs to go forward. So we're going to just use a screwdriver and pop it forward. We are now in the four-wheel drive position. You'll know that we're in the four-wheel drive position because we've made a perfect square here in the factory orientation. In the factory orientation, you cannot get that perfect square in any other position other than in the four high position. We also know that we're in the four high position because the shift rails themselves are both equally protruded forward. So this is the correct orientation that we want to be in for splitting these case halves. The other thing that we're going to want to do is use that 6mm Allen key right here in order to get the detent ball and spring out. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here in just a sec. So we've just broken tension, and what we're going to do is just work this bolt out. These can get gummed up over time, although there is no sealant from Toyota on these bolt heads. So you're going to want to clean these up. If nothing else with a wire brush, but if you have a thread chaser, that would be awesome to clean up before you reinstall these. But they should get to a point where they're pretty easy to remove, and then I'm going to hold my hand out to catch. Oh, don't have to worry about it. So there's a small spring right in here, and you can see it's starting to work its way out. So we're going to go ahead and grab that spring, and that spring is holding a detent ball in place. So we've got the spring and the ball. So these are the two things that we need to remove in order to get this shift rail out right here. And we want to remove this shift rail in order to, one, remove it fully, so that way we can cut that tab off that we talked about earlier that's up here. And two, we need to remove the locking pin, which is right now hidden by both of these shifters. So we're just going to put this cap back in to make sure we don't get more debris in there for the time being. A couple of rotations should be enough, and we're going to put the ball and spring in a safe location. Okay, we're now ready to separate the case halves. We are in the four-wheel drive low configuration right now. It doesn't really matter what configuration you are in with your shift rails. We're going to show you a common issue that happens and how to rectify it when you're taking these apart. But suffice it to say, now we can just pull these case halves. So we're just going to work them back and forth slowly here. And I may need my pry bar for this. And you don't want to pry on any of the actual mating surfaces. You want to pry on the areas closest to the dowel pins. And I think I've got us in a spot now where I can pop these apart. There we go. Lean one of them back and lean one of them forward. So one of the things that you're hearing rattle around is the synchro that goes on the front of this shaft right here when you've got them separated. This cutout right here actually goes to a set of split bearings, and those split bearings usually ride in this outer case. And what will happen is that they can get jarred when you're taking the case halves apart, and then they can lay in there one after another. Now, I don't know how well you'll be able to see down in there, but if you look down in here, you can see that those bearings are actually sitting one in front of the other, and I can even remove one just like this. So what we're going to do when we reinstall these is make sure that they are in the correct orientation and not laying both half moons facing like this. So that's one of the common issues that you'll find when you're splitting these case halves. The other common issue that you'll find is on this case half over here. This is the synchro that we just talked about putting back on. And that means because there's a synchro, there are the actual synchronizing pieces down here that can come out easy when you are shifting. So you want to be careful that if any of those have come out, that you do put them back in the correct orientation with this gear. Now, we are going to drive this top pin out, but before that, I'm actually going to have my cameraman zoom in on this spot right here, and I'm going to show you why we left this partially in when we go to remove this shift rail. So we're going to pop this shift rail forward just enough to where we can remove this piece that most people call the pill, but this is the catch for the two shift rails. You will not be reinstalling this. This piece can be discarded. We've now driven out the pin that holds the shift fork onto this shift rail. And so what we're going to do is just pull this rail up and out. And then this fork can come off. Just remember the orientation that it goes in when you go to reinstall it. So we're just going to keep it in that orientation. And then the rail here has this piece that I'm going to come a little bit closer to the camera on. And this piece right here is the piece that we're going to have to cut off. And I'll give you a black background so you can see it a little bit better. We're just going to cut this piece off and make sure that it's nice and ground down and flat with no edges that can catch. We're going to do that with a Dremel, and we'll rejoin you when we're ready for reassembly. Now that we have that ear cut in an orientation where it resembles the factory ear and we've trimmed it down from a height perspective, we are ready to reinstall. So we're going to grab our factory shift fork, put that back in place, and then we are going to take our shift rod and just slowly work it back into its correct orientation. And then once we have access to the pinhole, we're going to take our cross pin and reinstall it. Okay, now that that is reinstalled, we're just going to check a quick shift, and it looks like everything is moving nice and smoothly. So these case halves are ready to go back together for us. For you at home who are doing this for your own vehicles, you will take a razor blade and scrape off all of the RTV going around these seals, and you'll put fresh RTV. The high temp or Toyota standard will work, and you're going to want to wait several hours before reinstalling this into your vehicle depending on temperature and humidity. But we are not doing that. We're not going to worry about that. This is an example transfer case. So we are going to reinstall these case halves now. I have just looked down in here and checked the orientation of the split bearing, and it looks like I am in the correct positioning for that. So we're just going to slowly orient the two case halves to go back together. The way that I like to do it is to hold the front case half and look through the opening where the shift rails go and just line them up. If you find that those are lined up, naturally the opening for the four-wheel drive shift rod will align just like this. Nice and slow, making sure that nothing is catching one way or the other. And if you're finding that you are having as much trouble as I am right now, this opening right here is about the same gap as that split washer. So we're just going to pull these apart and recheck. Nice and slow. Again, we're not trying to damage anything while we're separating these cases. I'm just going to grab my pry bar again and just slowly make sure nothing is catching. Check the orientation of that split washer. Check to make sure that our synchro has not come apart. That's correct. And that split washer did move inside of this case particularly, so I'm going to reorient that into the installation position. And I don't know how many times I'm going to call it a split washer, even though it's a split bearing. And I've shown it. Okay. One of the ways that you can avoid having those move so much is if you have some assembly lube or assembly grease, it is a good time to put a little bit on there just to keep them in a similar orientation. I do not have any on hand, but that is okay. This will only take a couple of tries. Part of the reason I am struggling so much is because I'm doing this by myself, but I want to show that you can do it by yourself. And I have done this several times before. It's just a matter of aligning everything in a particular way that makes sense to you, where everything fits back together the way that it is supposed to. Okay, just like that. Now, this gap here is just because of my dowel pins, and maybe I've caught a little bit of this rag underneath, but we are ready to zip these back together. We're going to put the factory torque spec up now, and this torque spec is for all of the bolts that go around these two case halves. So we're going to get these case halves mounted back together, and then we will go through the shifting and make sure that everything is working correctly. We will need to put the detent ball and spring back in this opening right here, and we'll need to put the four-wheel drive flange and nut back on this other side. But the rest of this is just going to be assembling the same way that you disassembled. This should be a fairly quick process. And then again, for you at home, you want to make sure that you get a nice seal with that RTV all the way around these case halves. Okay, our next step is to reinsert the ball and spring. So we're going to go ahead and take this plug out. The ball goes first, and then I follow it immediately with the spring, making sure not to get my glove in the way. And then the plug goes in just in front. And again, Toyota did not put any factory sealant on these pieces. However, if you want to put just a drop on there, that would probably be all right. Now that that ball and spring are in place, the detents should be correct for this shift rail. The only other thing that we have to do is reinstall the flange. Now, again, this front drive shaft flange, if you already have this off, it's a great time to replace this seal. We are not using this transfer case in the vehicle. This is our demonstration transfer case. So we're just going to reinstall the flange. And then we have, again, the nut that we are reusing, but we recommend that you go with a new one. We will drive this in to the correct depth for this particular vehicle. There are depths for this particular bolt and for the preload that you will want to follow correctly for your vehicle. So make sure you're aware of that when you go to reinstall this flange. Now that we have that shift detent reinstalled, we can go ahead and go through the shifting on this T-case, make sure we have all of the gears correct and that everything is doing what we're expecting it to do. We are in the too high position right now. So if I hold on to the four-wheel drive flange, I'm able to spin the input shaft and only see the two-wheel drive output shaft moving. So we can go ahead and pop ourselves now into the, once again, factory. This is the 4-high position. So now if I spin this input, both of the output flanges will spin. We can move this rail up and into the neutral position. So now there may be some movement out of the back because of the viscosity of the fluid, but we're able to move this input shaft without moving either one. And then we are in the low 4 position. So now this input shaft and both output shafts spin together. These are all factory gears that we've talked about so far. The gear that we just unlocked, we can go into now, which is the 2-wheel drive low position. So if I hold on to the 4-wheel drive output shaft, it does not move. However, I can move the 2-wheel drive output shaft and it is moving just fine. And then the final gear that we've unlocked here is the 2-wheel drive neutral gear. And that would be right here. So if I hold on to that output shaft, make sure I'm actually all the way in the gear, If I hold on to that shaft, you can see that I can rotate the input shaft and the output shaft does not spin. So we know that we've got all the gears correct. These are in a square orientation. However, I'm going to make sure that they are both in their forwardmost square orientation. So there's one, and then there's two. So we can go ahead and install our DualShift now. And when you go to install these, we do not provide a factory gasket because we're going to go with RTV the same way that Toyota should have done it from the factory. So if you were to install these right now, you would want to make sure that you had RTV, a clean surface, and then RTV around this base. However, once again, this is a demonstration, so we're just going to install this in a way that makes sense for us today. I've got the shifters now, like we talked about earlier. They're in the correct configuration for this particular transfer case, and the two shift keys are in the correct orientation for installation. So I'm going to install them now with just two of the factory hardware bolts in order to demonstrate what we need. So that's partially in and that's partially in there. Okay, this is, we hope, the best angle to show you what we're working with. So if I start spinning the input shaft now, you'll see that the two-wheel drive output shaft is spinning. We are in the 2 high position. This puts us into the 4 high position. This is the 4 neutral position. This is the 4 low position. This is the 2 low position. And this is the 2 neutral position. We're going to jump to the next video now, which is the actual installation of this into the vehicle that we have. So we will meet you over at that video right now. Now that the transfer case has been reinstalled into your truck, we're going to prep the materials that need to go inside the truck. So in this case, we of course have the DualShift itself. We have the 2 TDM shift knobs. Now these ones are also billet aluminum 6061 T6. These are offered on our website as well with these jam nuts. And then what we've done, and you're going to want to do this individually, is we've got 2 factory shift boots here that we have stitched together on the same frame, and you can see a little bit of the frame poking out right there, but that is so we can accommodate the 2 shifters while keeping that factory look. Now there are too many trims both in color and in boot depths and styles for us to be able to offer this to everyone, so you will want to go source these boots for your specific vehicle for your specific trim color. Now when we install this in my truck, you'll see this trim does not perfectly match my truck. However, we just wanted to do this as a demonstration of what could be done. This cost us in total about $30. So we're going to move over to the truck now, start taking the interior apart, and we will get to the installation of these dual shifts on my truck. Now taking a look inside the cab of the vehicle, we're of course looking at the bezel setup that we've got. So this is where that boot will go that we showed earlier. So we need to take this outer bezel piece off and then the metal subframe underneath it. In order for us to get this outer bezel off, we actually need to tilt the center console portion up and out of the way. And there's going to be a screw here, a screw here, a screw here, a screw there. And then there will be 2 10mm bolts on the bottom, on the back of our glove box here. This is, of course, a Tacoma on a 4Runner. Your system will be a little bit different, but you still need to get underneath this bezel. So the setup is going to be exactly the same on both. We'll go ahead and get this removed, and then everything will be exactly the same for the 4Runners and the Tacomas once we get this bezel off. So we'll go ahead and get this bezel out of the way, which means we're going to take this shift knob off, and we will catch up with you guys just as soon as we've got this cleaned up. Now that the bezel has been removed, you have a much better view of what's going on underneath here. Now, notably, you will not have these 2 cords. This one goes to the handle for the winch, and this one goes to the phone charger, so you won't have either one of these. However, you still will want to have a slit, a secondary hole made in your rubber boot, so that way you can fish through the second shift arm. Now, there's a series of 10mm bolts that go around this metal subframe, so we're going to unbolt all of those, and then we will have to pull one of the cotter pins underneath just to get this shifter out of the way. And then one more thing you'll want to do that we've already done is you'll want to make a small slit in your carpet here, and that is so you can access the back tab of this metal subframe. It goes just about 3 inches back, and you'll want to make sure that you can just peel this carpet out of the way, and then when you go to put your center console back on, that will be nice and covered. You will not notice that it's there. So we're going to get all of those little 10mm bolts off, and then we are going to show you how to get that cotter pin out from underneath. And then it's a very simple process from there, unmounting the old shift handle and mounting the new one. So we'll catch up with you guys in just a few. Now that we have all those bolts off and out of the way, you can see that the metal bezel is free moving, and this is that tang that we were talking about. So we need to remove the pin that holds this shifter down into the transmission, and it's going to be on the driver's side underneath. It's a cotter pin you can pull with a small pair of pliers. So we're going to go under and do that right now. It's very quick. You do not adjust your linkage in any way. It's just detaching your linkage, and then we'll attach it really quick as we go to reinstall this metal bezel. So I'll meet you guys down there, quick and dirty, and then we'll come back up here and get our shifters installed. Forgive the shaky camera. We are looking at the back of the driver's side CV axle, and if you just look straight up from there, you will see this cotter pin. This cotter pin is the one that we're going to pull out. We're going to push that cross pin through, and then we will have this linkage right here freed that we can go move up in the cab. So I'm going to pull that cross pin out, and then I'll meet you up there. This is what it looks like with the cross pin pulled out. Now notably, this lever is all the way rearward, which is our park position. So you will want to make sure that it is all the way back, and that your e-brake is on when you are doing this procedure. Okay, back in the cab now, we should be able to move this bezel up and off of this four-wheel drive shifter handle. We are unplugged from everything that we need to be unplugged from, but it is a bit of an awkward angle, especially with me having this extra cord, just to clear that linkage that we just disconnected. So you need to come up while turning simultaneously, and then you don't want that boot to get stuck. So we will just lift and turn, and lift and turn, and lift and turn, and get this boot off of there. And now we have access to our four-wheel drive shifter. So we'll go ahead and get that unbolted. Those are all going to be, I believe, 12mm, and we will prep our new shifter to go in. So I'm going to swap those across right now, and then I will meet with you guys when we are ready to do some reassembly. Okay, with that shifter off of there, you can see the linkage. You of course should be familiar with that by this point. The only other thing that I've done is pull off the breather hose that goes to the transmission. Our shifters of course have a pressure valve on the top, so you don't need to run a bleeder hose. So we're just going to cap off that transmission opening, and then we are going to clean up the rest of that surface, and then we're going to get some RTV on there so that we don't get any leaking, and then we're going to get our shifters mounted in position and check to make sure that everything is shifting the way that it is supposed to. Now, again, you're going to want to make sure that your vehicle is you want to make sure that that lever on the transmission is all the way back, meaning that you're in park, and that you have your e-brake on. You don't want your vehicle to accidentally start moving while you're doing this. So that's just a little bit of food for thought. Anyways, we're going to get to the cleaning. I'm just going to hit that rag that I have with some brake clean and clean the edges of that, make sure that there's absolutely no oil on there. And then we're going to get that small cap on the hose like we talked about, mount our shifters, and then we're going to maneuver that boot up and over the top. Now that the DualShift has been installed, I've run through the gears to make sure that everything is working correctly. I'm now going to get the metal bezel back up and over the top. This can be a little bit of a challenge, so just take your time and go slow. You're in no rush here. You'll want to make sure that the rightmost handle goes up through the actual opening, and then you'll want to make sure that the left handle goes up through the cut that you make in the boot. So we're just going to kind of finesse the shifter in place, and then we will get it all bolted back down, and then go underneath and do the cotter pin. So I'll catch up with you guys when we have the 10mm bolts at least in place. Okay, the metal bezel is back on, the boots are in place. I've moved for myself those 2 wires back in place. We've reconnected the cotter pin down below. So we are ready to put the bezel back on. So this is what we were talking about earlier. This is the boot on the factory bezel, and it's just held in there with these clips that you can move these tabs out of the way. I don't want to bend this thing up too bad, but you can move these tabs here out of the way of the metal under frame, and then that boot will pop right out. So we're going to pop our double boot in place. Again, there's nothing special about this boot other than it is 2 factory boots stitched together. And of course, like we talked about, it is the wrong color for my particular vehicle, but this will do a good job of showing something that is new and different. So we've got our dual shift boots ready to go onto our dual shift. I'm going to get these bezels on, both this one, and get the center console back in place, and then we'll get the shift knobs on and we'll go for a drive. I will catch up with you guys before we leave, show you what it looks like and show you the shifting. That is what the final installation looks like, with the shift boots, of course, in place and the shift knobs mounted. So I'm going to take some higher quality photos here and we'll put them up now. A couple of those. And we will go through the shifting as the vehicle's warming up. I will meet you guys out of the garage. Okay, with the last little bit of light that we have left, I don't have the vehicle on right now because I think it would be kind of hard to hear me, but we of course can go through all of our gear sets. I am on a gravel road right now, making it easy to shift through all of these. So this configuration right here is in the 2 high position. This is the 4 high position. This is 4 neutral. And then all the way forward is 4 low. Those are your factory positions. What you get with these shifters is the ability to go into the 2 low position and the 2 or true neutral position. So the way to do this is to go through your factory gear sets on this vehicle, chain drive, shift on the fly. Follow the standard shifting instructions, and then when you're going to go into the 2 low or 2 neutral position, we go ahead and do those with the vehicle off. Now, the reason that we do this specifically on the automatics is because we can't push in the clutch and fully disengage the rotational momentum. So we have a torque converter, and even though we are in the park or neutral positions, we run into the issue of those gears can still be spinning due to the viscosity of the fluid. So we're going to go ahead and go through these shifts right now, and I'll show you what they look like. For this vehicle in particular, like I said, we're shift on the fly. So we're moving. We are in 4-wheel drive. And then for us to go into low and neutral, we need to be in neutral. We can shift up now into neutral, and then 1 more to engage low, and then low. Again, this is our factory 4 low. Nothing different here than factory. Okay. Now to undo these, we're just going to go through the same process that we did to go into them, just like that. And then back through it to go back into 2-wheel drive. So, like I said before, I'm going to turn the vehicle off. I find that to be the best way to do these for this automatic, and I will revisit you once I've done the correct shifting. And we are now moving in the 2 low position, which again, of course, is not a factory position. And then if I show you up here on the dashboard, the 4-wheel drive indicator light has not come on. So we are, of course, able to go into this gear and true neutral. These gears have a variety of uses for towing, winching, for trailering. There's plenty of times where these come in handy, and the ability to control what gear you're in when opens up your ability to use your Toyota better. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the comments.